All right, Daredevil Born Again episode 1 and 2 spoilers coming at you in 3, 2, 1. I can't believe they killed Foggy. They actually did it. Like, we kind of knew it was coming because of the set photos, but I didn't want to think it was true. But they did it. I have a theory that he might not be dead, but it's probably a shot in the dark, really. And I just want to know what you all thought about this in the comments down below, both about episode 1 and 2 overall, but the fact that they killed Foggy. And if you didn't know, I started a reaction channel. You can check out my reaction to episodes 1 and 2 on Cosmic Pop Talk. I'll link it down below. Let's dive right into the breakdown. The very first shot that we see here in the beginning of Daredevil Born Again is actually mirroring one of the final shots from the Daredevil Netflix series, season 3, episode 13. Matt/Daredevil has just taken down Kingpin in his penthouse. The FBI is taking Kingpin away, and Matt watches from on top of a building. So right away, we are taken back to the end of the Daredevil Netflix series, showing us that this is indeed a continuation, which wasn't always Marvel Studios' plan. Originally, it was going to be basically a new project and not really be connected to the Netflix series at all. Luckily for us, they did change that, and they completely rewrote the show to give us what we have now. And although Foggy does die, in the original version that they had for the show, Karen or Foggy weren't going to be in it, and there was a script that had them dying off screen. So this is at least better than that. But then we continue with scenes of many different places in New York City, taking us into Hell's Kitchen. We then cut to a street that has a fairly familiar sign on it that says Nelson, Murdoch, and Page. This, of course, stands for Foggy Nelson, Matt Murdoch, and Karen Page. This is the name of their law firm. Foggy and Matt met in college. That's where they became best friends. They then took an internship at a big law firm, and they were offered jobs there, but they declined those jobs because they wanted to start their own law firm and be able to represent the little people, the people who really need help. So they formed their own law firm, which they titled Nelson and Murdoch. We saw that in season 1, and then in season 3 at the very end, after they went through so much together, all three of them, which is why the beginning of this episode is such a kick to the heart, but they decided to rename the law firm Nelson, Murdoch, and Page, adding in Karen's last name. After we see the sign, we cut to the door where the three names on the sign come out. Our three familiar faces look very happy, they're laughing together, but the music is very ominous, and it's a little dark, and it's building up tension, implying that yes, they're laughing, but something is about to happen. As we see Matt, Foggy, and Karen go to Josie's bar, we get even more foreshadowing that something is about to happen to Foggy, as we hear Foggy say, dark times indeed. But they give us a little bit of hope. The music changes to upbeat as we go to Josie's. Matt and Foggy help Josie keep her bar, and now that is where they drink. And they were there a lot in the Netflix Daredevil series season 1 through 3. Inside of Josie's, we continue this upbeat, good feeling as we see Matt and Karen flirt. Karen says, "Or we could just get out of here." And she says this kind of jokingly, but also very seriously. But Matt says that is a distinct violation of the friend code. And that is because in the Daredevil Netflix series, the two of them dated and broke up. And of course, Karen knows that Matt is Daredevil. So here they are showing us that they're not together. They have decided to be friends and put their romance to the side, either temporarily or forever. We'll have to wait and see on that. Karen laughs and says, "Nobody is above the law." And this is a kind of little jab at Daredevil here, because although Matt is a lawyer by day, trying to enforce the law, Daredevil takes it into his own hands, being above the law. Then we cut to New York City Police Department Detective Cherry, who is retiring, and this seems to be kind of a party for him. Matt actually mentions to the gang when they're walking to Josie's that he can't believe he's retiring. But immediately after that, he said, still, the city finds other ways to protect itself. A nod to really himself, Daredevil. At the bar, we see Foggy talking to Kirsten McDuffie, who in the comics was the assistant district attorney. And here she does say when she leaves the DA's office, so that is most likely what she is right now as well in this series. In the comics, Kirsten actually believes that Matt is Daredevil and often tries to get him to admit that he is Daredevil. They have a very friendly relationship in the comics, and that is displayed here in episode 1 as well. But in the comics, their relationship blossoms into a romantic one, and they date. Not sure if that's going to play out here in Daredevil Born Again season 1 or 2, or maybe even 3 if they do one. We'll have to wait and see on that, but in this scene, they're actually teasing that Foggy is going after her. And he might have even had a chance if it wasn't for what's about to happen. Still kind of bitter about it, not gonna lie. And like I said, I do have a theory about how he might not be dead, but we'll get into that in just a bit. But before we get there, it's important to note what Cherry says. Cherry says that the future of crime fighting is vigilantes. He says, Daredevil, White Tiger, they're the future. This is obviously going to come into play as Kingpin becomes mayor and decides to target vigilantes, saying that they are not above the law. And I'm sure in a future episode, he's going to pass a law that says it's illegal to be a vigilante. So when Foggy's talking to Kirsten, they're talking about a client that Foggy has that they refer to kind of as crazy. Actually, Kristen calls him Dumb Benny. He did some dumb things. However, it sounds like he might have been framed because Foggy believes that they're going to win. And Matt has a way of detecting if people are lying or not by monitoring their heartbeat, which he can hear due to his enhanced hearing. But unfortunately, this ultimately leads to a phone call from Benny, who we find out that Foggy has actually been hiding at his own apartment because Benny was getting threats after what happened at an incident at Red Hook, which is most likely referring to Red Hook Pier. But he calls Foggy and he says that there's somebody downstairs and he thinks people are coming to get him. Matt focuses on Foggy on the phone and hones in on the conversation so he can hear. He knows something's wrong, so him and Karen go outside. Foggy explains the situation, and as Benny is on the phone, they show us somebody breaking into what we assume is Foggy's apartment with a paperclip, and they show us a fly being killed by a paperclip. And of course, there's only one person who can throw like that with precision and accuracy to the T, and that is Bullseye. Good old Dex. And if you didn't watch the Daredevil Netflix show, the last time that we saw Bullseye was at the end of season 3 of the Daredevil Netflix show. Bullseye started off as an FBI agent, but he was betrayed by the FBI to be a fall guy. From there, Kingpin started to manipulate him, and eventually Bullseye started to work for Kingpin, and he really started to see Kingpin sort of as a father figure, and he grew attached to him. Kingpin told Bullseye to kill Daredevil, and he failed. But ultimately, Bullseye learned that Kingpin killed the woman that he liked, Julie Barnes. So in the finale of season 3 and the Netflix show in general, Bullseye dressed as Daredevil went after Kingpin's wife, Vanessa. Luckily, the real Daredevil was there, and from that point, Kingpin and Daredevil kind of fought Bullseye together. Yes, they were fighting each other, but Bullseye was the huge threat since he was trying to kill Vanessa, and he can with pretty much anything. Again, that is why he's called Bullseye. His accuracy is pretty much 100%, plus he can ricochet things as well, which we see in an upcoming scene here in Born Again. But ultimately, Kingpin grabs him and throws him against the wall, his back hitting it, crushing his spine, paralyzing him. And the very last thing we actually see in the entire series for Daredevil on Netflix is the doctors operating on Bullseye's spine. Now in the comics, he gets an adamantium spine. Not sure if they're going to go this way in the MCU, but they did just introduce adamantium in Captain America Brave New World. And I wouldn't put it past some big criminal organization to have gotten their hands on some adamantium, and now they gave it to Bullseye so they could use Bullseye themselves. Not sure how likely that is, but Bullseye did survive the fall at the end of this scene, and you have to wonder if it's because he has been enhanced in some way, shape, or form. We'll have to wait till other episodes to find out. So we learned that it's Bullseye going after Benny. Matt leaves and he suits up as Daredevil, but not before Foggy says that he didn't tell him because he didn't want Matt to have an excuse to be Daredevil again. He doesn't want him to go out and get hurt. So Matt goes off as Daredevil, but unfortunately we learned that Bullseye was looking for Benny to find out where Foggy is. And he probably did that on purpose as well, to get Matt away from Foggy because he knows that he's Daredevil, so he could kill Foggy without Daredevil interfering. So he pulls out his rifle and he pulls out his sight, which has a bullseye on it, obviously for his character Bullseye. Matt hears all of this about to happen, but sadly, he shoots Foggy. Foggy's blood splatters on Karen. 2 cops come out of the bar. They are killed instantly, both one tap to the head, showing us how accurate Bullseye is. He gets off the roof very quickly as all of a sudden we see him walking down the street and he's throwing smoke. He walks up to Karen and you can tell that this is very personal to him. He wants to kill the people closest to Daredevil. This is about revenge. It's very personal to him. Otherwise, he would have just killed Karen from the rooftop. He only fired 3 shots. He definitely had some rounds left. He killed Foggy from the rooftop and he could have easily killed Karen as well. But instead, he wanted to walk up to her, show himself to her, and he even says, "Hey, Karen," as he's about to kill her, showing us how extremely personal this really is. Daredevil / Matt is the only person to have ever bested Bullseye. Usually he has no problem killing people at all, but he could not beat Matt Murdock. And he's definitely going to go after Kingpin and Vanessa as well, I'm assuming, to try and finish what he started in season 3. He's about to kill Karen, but Daredevil comes swinging in, hitting him through the window of Josie's. And from here on out, you can tell that Bullseye is he's kind of gone insane. He doesn't care about anything anymore, and he's killing a lot of innocent people in this fight. Some of them are cops, some of them are civilians. In fact, the first thing that you notice when Bullseye gets up is he throws some smoke, then a female cop is reaching for her gun about to pull it out, and Bullseye throws a knife right in the middle of her head, instantly killing her. Daredevil goes and gets his gun, kicks it away, but Bullseye actually prefers using throwing weapons. In the comics, when Bullseye was a soldier for the United States, he was in a fight and his weapon failed to shoot. It jammed up, so instead he threw his gun at the person and he killed him with it. So from there on out, Bullseye has preferred weapons that he can throw. So even without his gun in this scene, he is just as dangerous. And we see that as the fight goes on, Bullseye sticks him with one knife, then he throws another one at him. People are running to the door through the smoke trying to get through. However, since it's really smoky, they can't see Daredevil and Bullseye fighting. That's why you see some people go towards them and then all of a sudden turn back away. They get close enough to where they see through the smoke and they see them fighting. This next knife that he throws is very easy to miss, but if you go frame by frame, you can see that Bullseye actually throws to his left a knife that ricochets off the wall or off the bar or something on it, and it goes into this guy's shoulder who is wearing a hat right here. So Bullseye continues to harm other people. Daredevil manages to knock him down for a bit, but he gets distracted listening to Karen talk to Foggy outside, trying to check and see if Foggy's gonna be okay. This allows Bullseye to get another shot on Daredevil and it hits him. We can see some people trying to get outside and one of them gets stabbed in the back by Bullseye trying to go. But Detective Cherry gets outside and he calls for backup. And we see that Karen is trying to stop the bleeding for Foggy. But Cherry and his partner go back in and try to get people out of the bar, which is where we see the continuation of Daredevil versus Bullseye. It's an incredibly cool fight scene where we see both Daredevil and Bullseye ricochet their weapons off other objects to hit their targets. Sometimes that is lights, and most of the time it's the other person. They make their way to the back where people who are in the back room close the doors, but you can see the silhouettes of Daredevil and Bullseye fighting until eventually Daredevil throws Bullseye through the door. Bullseye is in the back room, and as he gets up, Daredevil actually grabs one of the people in the back room and pulls him away to save him from one of Bullseye's knives. So again, Bullseye is still trying to hurt a lot of people in there. The woman on the left actually hits him with a pull stick, doesn't really do much. Bullseye picks up some billiard balls and he starts to use those as weapons, hitting the woman on the left and doing a massive ricochet trick shot kind of here to hit the woman on the right in the head, who Daredevil catches as she falls. Bullseye makes his way upstairs where there's a man on the stairs who says, "Babe, we gotta call the cops. Something's going on downstairs," and Bullseye instantly kills him with a knife. He doesn't kill the woman though, or if he does, he kills her with a punch and not a knife, and he has some left because as Daredevil comes up the stairs, he throws a knife at Daredevil. Daredevil blocks it with his billy club, but the woman he punched was carrying groceries. She dropped a can on the floor. He picked it up and he throws that at Daredevil as well. And as they fight, we can see that Daredevil has been hit with a lot of knives. You can see one on his leg, you can see a few on his chest, one in his stomach. As they continue fighting, we can see that he's stabbed about 4 times in the stomach, about 3 times in the chest. And if you slow this scene down, you can see that both of them are absolutely exhausted and hurt. Daredevil has hit Bullseye in the head with his billy club many times, and obviously Daredevil is stabbed a lot. If you slow this scene down, you can see that Bullseye is throwing 2 knives at a time sometimes. Daredevil manages to use his billy club to block some of them, but then Bullseye starts ricocheting the knives off the wall and Daredevil gets stabbed in the back. And then again in the front, and he falls and leans back on the wall as Bullseye does the same. Bullseye goes for one more knife throw, but Daredevil blocks it and he throws his billy club at him, hitting him in the head. But as he does that, he can hear Karen once again, and he hones in to listen to how Foggy's doing. This distracts him, and Bullseye actually takes Daredevil's billy club and throws it back at his head. This buys Bullseye enough time to go upstairs and get on the roof, and when he comes out of the door, notice that he's holding some knives like they're Wolverine claws. He has 3 in each hand, and as he walks out the door, he kind of does look like he has Wolverine claws. I wonder if that was intentional. Bullseye thinks Daredevil's going to come through the door, but he appears on top of it, on the rooftop already. He jumps off at Bullseye. Bullseye throws some knives at him. Daredevil blocks them and then hits him in the head. From there, he starts to just wail on him. His anger is taking control. He rips off Bullseye's mask, but Bullseye manages to find a wood plank on the floor. He hits Daredevil over the head with it. As he's walking away, he hits him with another knife, but Daredevil takes out one of the knives that Bullseye hit him with, and he throws it in the back of Bullseye as he's trying to escape off the roof. Or you could argue that he might be trying to kill himself in this situation. Either way, Daredevil doesn't let him get away. From here, we see that Daredevil has once again honed in on Karen and Foggy's heartbeat. He has Bullseye subdued at this moment, so he doesn't really have to worry about him too much. Unfortunately for him and all of us, really, Matt hears Foggy's heart stop. Foggy has died, and Matt starts to yell, "Why, why, why?" To top it all off, Bullseye gives Daredevil a little pat on the shoulder. This was what Bullseye set out to do. He actually set out to kill Daredevil's friends, to make him suffer. And in this moment of grief, as his best friend has just died, Matt/Daredevil ignores his rule about never killing anybody, and he pushes Bullseye off the roof. Karen's still over Foggy's body, hears the body drop behind her, and she doesn't know whose body it is. She doesn't know if it's Matt or Bullseye. She doesn't know if both of her best friends just died. She slowly turns, saying, "Please, please, please," most likely thinking, "Please don't be Matt, please don't be Matt." And as soon as she sees that it's Bullseye and not Matt, she starts letting out gasps for air. She then looks up and sees Matt on the rooftop. We see that Bullseye is still alive, somehow. Again, maybe it's an adamantium spine, maybe a vibranium spine, who knows? But they make it a point to show us he's alive because he shows up later. And what's interesting is that this is actually how Bullseye gets his spine shattered in the comics. In the comics, Bullseye and Daredevil are fighting on top of high New York City buildings, and while they're fighting, Daredevil allows Bullseye to fall to his death. However, he doesn't die. His spine gets shattered and he's paralyzed. Then Lord Darkwind laces his bones with adamantium in hopes that Bullseye would freely serve him. However, he just goes back to New York, but before he can fight and be employed by Kingpin again, he has to fight his former friend, Deadpool, and he actually defeats Deadpool. Obviously, that is not how it goes down here. In the finale of Daredevil on the Netflix series, Kingpin is actually the one who shatters his spine, but it's cool that this scene right here where Daredevil pushes Bullseye off the roof mirrors the scene in the comics where Daredevil doesn't push him but lets him fall, and that's where his spine gets originally shattered. Daredevil takes off his mask, and then Cherry comes to the roof, discovering that Matt Murdock, who he knew as a lawyer, is actually Daredevil, which is always a really big shock when people find out because Matt's blind. But Matt takes off his mask and he tosses it away, marking the end of Daredevil for him, at least in this moment. When Matt drops it, he begins to sob and he looks up into the sky, most likely looking up at God. Matt is Catholic. It's a big part of who he is. If you watch the Netflix series or read the comics, you know this. He was raised in an orphanage by the Catholic Church. His mother is a nun there, Sister Maggie. So in this moment, he is probably looking up at God going, why? Why did my best friend have to die? His mask falls down below, right to where Foggy was, but if you notice at this point as it's falling, Foggy is no longer there. There are some EMTs taking somebody in a gurney. That might be Foggy. That could be another casualty of somebody who was there that got hit by Bullseye. But this ends the beginning of Daredevil Born Again episode 1. Now, like I said, I have a theory about Foggy's death, and that theory is he might be alive. It is a long shot, but in the comics, Foggy actually fakes his death. After it's revealed to the world that Matt Murdock is Daredevil, Matt tries to convince Foggy to fake his death for his protection, and eventually they do successfully fake his death. And while of course nothing that happened in this scene is fake within the realm of the universe, there is a slight hope inside of me that wants to think that he was somehow revived, that somehow they saved him, but after Matt said, you know what, your death has to be real, we have to act like you died for your own safety, because whoever is after me or Daredevil from here on out will always be after you and Karen. Now, while this is a theory of mine, I don't actually think this is the case. I hope it is, but I don't think so because Matt still has Foggy's funeral card, the pamphlet from his funeral, and it has Braille on it just for Matt, and he carries it along with him. Now, of course, there is a chance that he keeps it with him as a reminder that he can't really be friends with Foggy because it'll put him in danger, but the more likely situation is he is carrying it with him to remember his friend. So again, just a theory of mine, but I doubt it's going to happen, sadly. Let me know your thoughts about it in the comments down below. Now, we do have a new intro, very different than the original Daredevil intro. However, it is very symbolic. In the intro, we see a lot of different statues. We see Daredevil's cowl, we see one of Kingpin, of the Statue of Liberty, of the chapel from the Daredevil Netflix series, but all of them throughout the intro are crumbling down. They are falling apart. However, Daredevil, he's already crumbled and he gets put back together, and it actually starts with a horn on his cowl, and that is actually what he loses on his cowl when he drops it, and that is what Karen ends up giving back to him later on. But this is very symbolic here. It's representing the title of the series, Daredevil Born Again. Right now, he's in a place where his best friend just died. Kingpin is becoming mayor. He's really kind of broken. But with everything else falling apart, like the chapel and the Statue of Liberty and the police badge, that tells us that basically New York City and Daredevil's life that he knows, that's going to start to fall apart as well, especially with Kingpin as mayor. And New York City is going to need Daredevil once again. And in this, we will see Matt become born again. The title also implies that perhaps Matt might lose faith during the show. That could also be symbolized here when the chapel is falling apart as well. He might lose faith, then regain it, and sort of be like a born again Christian. We'll have to wait and see how this plays out. We then go to 1 year later and Matt is in a new apartment. This is very different than his old apartment. His old apartment was very dark, even though it had that giant screen across the street. On the TV, we see that there's an election going on right now for the mayor of New York City. The reporter says there's over 15 candidates, including a stand-up comedian, in which the governor said that the system is broken, which I think we're about to find out it's a lot more broken than Matt would hope for as Kingpin becomes mayor. We see Matt go to his closet where he feels every single one of his suits because he's feeling the fabric of them. That is how he tells them apart. He's blind, so he can't see them, obviously, but he knows how they feel. He knows this one feels this way, so it's the blue one, or the tan one, or the black one. He grabs his coat, prepares to leave, and as he does, he grabs his iconic Daredevil glasses, his keys, and the program card from Foggy's funeral. We then cut to a plate of food that has been set up very meticulously and nicely, instantly telling us that it's Kingpin, because that's what we learned in Daredevil Season 1, that Kingpin really likes. Great food presented very nicely. In fact, even when he was in prison, he still managed to get food basically prepared the same way. Then we see Kingpin go to pick a suit, and he does kind of hover over the white one at first, which would be the classic Kingpin look, and the last time that we saw him, he was actually wearing that white suit. However, he doesn't pick the white one, he picks the gray one because this is a new Kingpin. It's not the crime boss Kingpin, it's the Kingpin who is going to run for mayor of New York, so he can't have people thinking he's a criminal. He has to have a new image, so he doesn't choose the white one. We then find out that when Kingpin was gone, Vanessa, his wife, has taken over. And she's done a great job of taking over. She's making everybody a lot of money and she has their respect. But then Kingpin shows up. Now, the last we saw Kingpin, he was being taken by the FBI. And Daredevil said that he was going to be spending his life in prison, but he's out. And we actually find out in episode 1 and 2 that he has actually been voluntarily gone. He needed to step away, so his absence was not spent in prison. In episode 1 or 2, they don't actually tell us how he got out. But at the very end of Daredevil, the Netflix series season 3, Kingpin did say, "No prison can hold me." So maybe he worked with the FBI again to get a shorter sentence, or heck, maybe he had a really good lawyer and he never even went to jail. We'll have to wait and see. But when he arrives, everyone in the room except for Luke, and we know his name because Vanessa called him by name, that is very intentional. I'm assuming that he's going to be a problem later on down the road. He's already kind of a problem in this scene, but everybody besides Luke is really surprised to see Kingpin, but they know who he is and they know that Vanessa's his wife, so they all step out. Now here we find out some very key details. One is that it sounds like Kingpin really didn't go to prison. Vanessa says, "You left the bed I sat beside for months while you recovered." And I'm assuming the recovery that she is speaking of is from the final fight of the Daredevil Netflix series. Bullseye managed to stab Kingpin a few times in the stomach with some glass because he gave his bulletproof jacket to Vanessa. Also, Daredevil beat his face in. So I'm sure he had some broken bones and was stabbed a couple of times. And if Vanessa was by his side while he was recovering, he probably wasn't in prison. But we learned that Kingpin was broken and he had to build himself back up. And that's another nod to the title of the series, Born Again. Kingpin himself now has been born again as well. And we find out that he has enough signatures to be able to run for mayor. But he tells Vanessa that he can't be linked to anything criminal. But Vanessa has done such a great job while he's been gone. She says that it's locked down. Nobody can trace anything to us. And if you notice, where they're meeting does seem to be a storage facility. That way they can meet in private, and the facility itself is most likely owned by Vanessa. We can see inside there's a bunch of art and sculptures, which Vanessa loves because that is what she originally did when Kingpin met her for the first time. They also show a couple of different shots of Kingpin's reflection on the table, and over his head is a light that makes a ring around him. It's kind of like a halo. They do this because in this conversation, he is talking about going clean. It's also the opposite of the devil of Hell's Kitchen, Daredevil. There's a lot of symbolism in this show, and I really love it in this shot right here. Now, Kingpin says that he's come to two realizations: his undying love for Vanessa, which he's always had. It's really always been about Vanessa. But when he tells Vanessa this, when he says, "My undying love for you," she doesn't really respond. In fact, she quickly goes, "And the second," wanting to pass over it pretty quickly, showing that she really is pretty pissed off at Kingpin. And we learn more about her situation a little later on. But the second is what Kingpin says he could do for the city, him and Vanessa. And that was a big part of what Kingpin was trying to do in the Netflix show as well. He always did want a better Hell's Kitchen, a better New York. He just went about it the complete wrong way, being a crime boss. But now he's trying to do it the legit way. At least they're trying to make us believe he is. But in the scene, you can kind of tell that Vanessa doesn't really want anything about her current life to change. She has money, she has power, she has respect. And we also learn later on in the episode that she has a guy on the side. But again, we'll get to that. But it ends with Kingpin saying, "It's time. It's time for him to run for mayor." We then go to the BB report, and they get a lot more into this later on, and we'll talk about it more in episode 2. But basically, this scene right here is supposed to tell us that Daredevil has been gone for a while, and crime is like insane in New York City right now. She says her name is BB Urich, and we do know Ben Urich from the Netflix series. At this point in time, we just make the connection for the last name, but in episode 2, we find out that this is actually the niece of Ben Urich. He was her uncle. We then go to Daredevil's new office, and it is no longer Nelson, Murdoch, and Page, but he has actually teamed up with Kirsten McDuffie, who we saw in the beginning. Foggy was talking to her, well, flirting with her before he sadly died. She has left the DA and now has teamed up with Matt, and their law firm is now called Murdoch and McDuffie. She talks to Matt about something happening tomorrow, and she also asks if he's heard from her, and we know that her is Karen Page. He says no, and he knows that she's trying to comfort him, but basically he says, "I'm good." Then we cut to what they were talking about, and we see Benjamin Poindexter, aka Bullseye, who seems to be fine. I mean, he's obviously incarcerated, but to survive all of those hits from Daredevil, multiple hits to the head, a stab to the back, and then a fall off of a multiple story building, really makes you wonder if he is enhanced, because a normal human being couldn't survive all of that. But he is obviously on trial for killing Foggy and the other people that he killed in the bar as well. Matt, of course, is a lawyer, so he's in the courtroom a lot, but never on the stand. And he says that justice won't be served today because no matter what happens, Foggy can't come back. His best friend, Franklin Nelson, but only his mother called him Franklin, he says, Foggy will never come back because he's dead. Now, them saying he'll never come back really makes me think about my theory, thinking about, well, maybe he does. They're really hammering this down right now. But at the same time, this is definitely something you would say if you were Matt Murdock. Your friend is never coming back if he was dead. And as he's saying this, he hears heels clacking on the floor, and he knows that it's Karen about to come in. So he pauses and he starts to hone in on her. Then she comes in and he gets a little emotional, and he plays it off like, of course, he's thinking about Foggy. He then points to Karen and says, "Justice won't be served because we will never see our friend again. And justice can't be served, but I encourage the court to punish this man, this assassin, to the full extent of the law. That will be the closest we get to justice." And they do. They sentence him to life in prison. New York does not have the death penalty, so that was not an option. New York got rid of the death penalty in 2004, so the fullest extent of punishment is life in prison. And you can see that Matt is still actually upset with this because, again, it doesn't bring Foggy back. And it's very fitting that Bullseye's hands are completely covered. Not only are they handcuffed, but they are covered so he can't use them. So he specifically can't throw anything. And he has zero remorse about killing 11 people. But of course, I think we all know we're going to see him again eventually. Then we cut to Karen and Matt, and we learn that Karen moved to San Francisco. Now in the comics, she does leave Foggy and Matt so she can go to LA to try and become an actress. From there, she kind of has a really sad story. She gets involved with the wrong people. She becomes a heroin addict. She gets involved with adult films, but eventually she does end up getting a little bit better and returns to New York and ultimately sacrifices herself to save Daredevil from getting killed by Bullseye. So I'm wondering if that's the route we're going down. They killed Foggy. They definitely are willing to kill Karen as well. However, the actress who plays her, Deborah Ann Woll, did say that she was going to be in season 2, so I think we're kind of safe for now. But we find out that her and Matt are not on good terms. When Foggy died, Matt essentially left, and Karen needed somebody there, and he wasn't there for her. This caused her to leave, and she didn't even call him. She just left. And now that she's back, you can tell she still is pretty bitter about it, and she's very emotional because obviously Foggy, and she doesn't even want to go somewhere to talk with Matt. She just wants to talk to him there briefly and leave. And she does, but not before Matt says, Daredevil is gone. I promised myself I'd let the system handle everything, and I'm not Daredevil anymore. He's not coming back. But before Karen leaves, she gives him a horn. She picked up the horn from when Daredevil dropped his mask off the roof that day when Foggy died. Matt pleads with Karen to stay, but she doesn't want any part of this, and she just wants to leave. This irritates Matt and puts him on edge, which we see going into the next scene where he's cooking for himself. He's in his apartment, no lights turned on because, well, you don't really need them turned on when you're blind. You can tell he's irritated, and the TV is on, and he focuses in on it because he hears something very interesting. He hears, "Good evening, New York. My name is Wilson Fisk." A name that he probably hasn't heard since he beat his face in. You can tell by Matt's facial expression that he is very disturbed hearing Kingpin on the news, especially since he is talking about vigilantes. Then he announces that he's running for mayor of New York. And this just pisses Matt off. It's a devastating blow to him. And this is kind of another thing that is breaking him. First Foggy, and then Karen. And then Karen again back in the courtroom. Now Kingpin. All of this, of course, is building up to his eventual return as Daredevil, but we'll get there. We cut to Kingpin and his campaign team. And we learned that in the polls, he's doing extremely well. And on socials, he is doing extremely well. In fact, Fisk Can Fix It is trending very hard. And we find this out from the character Daniel Blake, who is played by Michael Gandolfini, whose father was the iconic and legendary actor James Gandolfini, who played Tony Soprano in The Sopranos. And Michael actually played a younger version of Tony Soprano in The Many Saints of Newark. We can see that Daniel Blake is trying to get on Kingpin's good side, and I'm assuming he knows about all of his criminal history. So I'm guessing that Daniel Blake eventually becomes kind of like the new Wesley to Kingpin. In the Netflix series, James Wesley was Kingpin's right-hand man, but even Kingpin himself said that he's more than just an employee, he's an actual friend. And he was the person closest to Kingpin, but Karen Page ended up killing him. Not her fault. He was threatening her and was most likely going to eventually end up killing her, so she just defended herself. But eventually, Kingpin did learn that Karen Page killed Wesley. But this person might fill that void for Kingpin, for a right-hand man. I'm guessing that Daniel Blake is going to be the person that does Kingpin's dirty work, because Kingpin does value loyalty, and when he asks his campaign manager where she found him, she says that he gathered 2,000 signatures for Kingpin to become mayor. That way he could run. And that's a ton of signatures. Out of the 25,000 he needed, this guy got 2,000 by himself, which shows loyalty to Kingpin. So Kingpin has noted that down. Back at Matt's law firm, he's talking to Kirsten, and she lies to him, saying that he has a client meeting with the doctor. And as he's walking down the street to go meet her, he uses his super hearing to hear what people are saying about Kingpin. And it's pretty much as you'd expect it to go. Half the people hate him because, of course, he has a criminal history. He was a crime boss. But the other half thinks that he'll actually get things done. And it's an exciting change up from the normal. And New York's crime has been out of hand with your regular politicians, so maybe Kingpin can do something about it. And obviously this gets under Matt's skin and irritates him even more than he's already been. So when he gets to the coffee shop and he finds out that Kirsten McDuffie, his friend and partner, set him up on a date and lied to both of them, both Matt and Heather, to get them both there, Matt gets even more irritated, and he doesn't exactly come off good because of how irritated he is, but he manages to pull it together. And the date actually goes well. Now, this is Heather Glenn. Heather Glenn has a pretty complicated story in the comics. She is very wealthy. Her father owns a large company, and her whole life, ever since she was a kid, was full of wealth. Not sure if they're going to really dive too deep into that in Daredevil Born Again, but basically what you need to know about her is that in the comics, she really had her eye on Matt. Now, Matt resisted her at first, but eventually the two of them did become romantic partners. And eventually she would go on to find out that Matt is indeed Daredevil. When meeting with Kirsten again, he is pissed off at her, but notice what she says. You need this. It's time. So he hasn't dated since Karen. He hasn't dated since Foggy has died, and he's definitely been noticeably irritable to everybody around him. And basically Kirsten saying, hey man, you need to get some so you can be less irritable. We then learned that Detective Cherry is back. However, he is retired, at least from being a New York City Police Department detective, but now he does private investigation work for Matt. And we find out that Matt asked Cherry to do some digging on Kingpin, and Cherry says, I would have done it even if you didn't ask me to, because again, a lot of people are really sus of Kingpin. They're wondering why he's running for mayor, why the people would even allow this, because he has been to jail in the past for being a crime boss. And Cherry says, he's clean. Every dollar is accounted for. And the explanation is apparently because his wife is really good with investments. And that's what Vanessa said. She said she made it bulletproof. It's all legit on the surface, at least. Of course, we know not underneath. But what she said is true. Nobody can really find anything that's illegal. And in this scene, we see how broken Matt currently is right now. He says, if I didn't really know who Kingpin was, I would say that he's going clean and that this is actually what he wants, to be a clean, good mayor. But he knows who Kingpin is. He knows what he's done, so he's not buying it. So at the same time, he says, well, if the people are dumb enough to elect him, basically, perhaps he is the mayor that the city deserves. This is showing how cynical Matt has become. It doesn't seem like there's much more hope inside of him. And Matt even says, let it go. Don't continue the investigation into Kingpin. We're just going to let it be, which is even him going, I'm not even putting Daredevil on the case. I'm just going to let it go completely. Although he doesn't. After listening to the debate on the television, hearing Wilson Fisk talk about how vigilantes are bad, and him talking about how his opponent suggested registering the vigilantes, which seems to be kind of a double nod here, one to Civil War and the Sokovia Accords, and two to the Superhuman Registration Act, which is what they called it in the Civil War comic, which they based the movie off of. So after hearing this, Matt decides to go meet Kingpin in person, and I absolutely love this part. If you notice the expression on Kingpin's face when he first realizes that Matt Murdock is there, he is kind of taken back, but at the same time, I think he expected Matt to show up at some point in time. I also love how the music fades away. The noise of the crowd fades away, and all you hear is Kingpin's footsteps until he eventually finds his words and says, it's been some time, hasn't it? And right when it shows us that he's talking to Matt, the original Daredevil theme song starts playing. Matt says, can we have a little chat? Kingpin agrees. Again, because I think he expected Matt at some point in time. And also, I think he wants to convince him, at least on the surface, so Daredevil will leave him alone, that he is actually good now. So he agrees, and when Matt begins to walk, you can tell by the look on his face, the way his mouth is open and his jaw is, he is still just very livid at the whole situation that Kingpin might be mayor. In the diner, they kind of give us an insight of how Matt's brain works. He says, your step is lighter, you've lost weight, showing us some of the abilities that he has with his heightened senses that you might not think about a lot. But he notices people's very distinct and specific steps. From that step, he can tell that Kingpin has lost weight and gained muscle. Kingpin says, I'm not going to spar with you, Murdock. And this is, it kind of has a double meaning here. One, he's physically not going to spar with him. That's what happened the last time they saw each other. They were beating the crap out of each other. Plus, Matt's father was a boxer, and Matt used to hang out at Fogwell's gym. Another sparring reference. But he's also talking about with words. He's basically telling Matt here, look, we have a past, say what you gotta say, cut the crap. And this scene is really great because you can really feel the tension here. Kingpin says, I gotta admit it's not entirely unpleasant to see you. And Matt gives off a genuine laugh here. You can tell. It's not huge, but he's like, yeah, considering the last time that we saw each other, I almost killed you, but we did make a deal to essentially stay out of each other's lives. Matt told Kingpin, you're going to leave Foggy and Vanessa alone. You're not going to touch them because if you do, I'm going to put your wife in jail forever and you're never going to see her again. And they both shook hands and they agreed. So it seems like since then, they've both obviously held up their ends. Foggy and Karen were left alone until Bullseye got loose and decided to take revenge. But Matt laughs because yeah, the last time they talked, they beat the crap out of each other, but they did come to an agreement. So it is kind of funny. Not entirely unpleasant because we had a past, but they've tried to put it behind them. Then Kingpin mentioned something very interesting. He asked Matt if he has children. Matt says, no, do you? Kingpin says, no, I tried to mentor somebody. But, well, that's the closest I've come. And Matt replies with, didn't she shoot you in the face? And Kingpin laughs because they are talking about Echo. Echo was first introduced in the MCU in the Hawkeye series, then she had her own show, of course. But at the end of the Hawkeye series, she did shoot Kingpin in the face. Kingpin laughs at this and says, yeah, younger generation, and Matt laughs at that too. Now, Kingpin mentions Becky's Diner. He says, I've never been to this place. I miss Becky's Diner. This is actually what Matt was saying to Foggy in the very beginning of the episode. He says, you know, Becky's Diner, it closed. And Foggy said, you're evil for even telling me that. It's a place in Hell's Kitchen where both Kingpin and Matt are from. And Matt says, yeah, I miss it too. Both say that they don't really make it to Hell's Kitchen that much anymore. And this is mentioned specifically to get across the point that they both have changed. Matt Murdock is no longer the lawyer in Hell's Kitchen or Daredevil. He is just a lawyer now, and he's come up in the world like Kingpin says. Kingpin is running for mayor now so he can give back to the city and try to help it. A supporter of Kingpin even comes up to the window saying hi to him as he talks about this. So Kingpin says he wants to help the city, but Matt is not entirely convinced, and he says, can you blame me considering that you've tried to kill me a few times? But Kingpin says, as you have. Matt immediately disagrees. He says, no. Incarcerate, yes, not kill, because Matt has his no kill rule. But at a couple of different points in time in the Netflix series, there were specific moments where Matt did set out as Daredevil to specifically kill Kingpin. Now, ultimately, the devil didn't get the best of him and he decided not to do it. But there were times where he did set out to kill him. But he still says, kill, never. However, Kingpin says, I wonder if your darker half, Daredevil, would agree. And then he goes on to say about Foggy, he had nothing to do with that. He kept his promise. This is the promise that I mentioned earlier, where Kingpin said he wouldn't touch Foggy or Karen, and Daredevil said he wouldn't go after Vanessa. This was an agreement between the two of them, and Kingpin right now is saying, hey, I know Foggy died. That was not me. And Kingpin assures him that Kingpin is gone. He's about to be the mayor of New York, and he's a completely different man. However, Matt says, well, I feel like you're gaming the system, which I'm sure we're going to find out is the case. But then Kingpin asks, why did you stop being a vigilante? Why did you stop being Daredevil? And Daredevil explains, a line was crossed. And I believe he's talking about two different lines here. One is that his friend was killed because of him. But the other one was he ended up not caring if he killed Bullseye. He pushed him off the top of the building. That's his line. That's the line that he never crossed before. He never killed anybody. Not on purpose, at least. And he purposefully tried to kill Bullseye. So the fact that he killed somebody or tried to kill somebody, and the fact that his friend was killed because of him, he felt like he lost the privilege because more damage was being done than good as him being Daredevil. And then this conversation starts to set up a lot of future events. Kingpin says, I heard you tried to kill Poindexter that night. And Matt shakes his head. Yeah. Then Kingpin says it's hard to come to terms with our violent nature. And this is going to be a major theme moving forward in Daredevil Born Again, because both Matt and Kingpin have to come to terms with their violent nature and they have to try to control it. Daredevil needing to control not killing people for his own sake, and Kingpin having to control his darker side so he can remain a clean mayor. And this is where Matt kind of gives Kingpin a warning. He says, look, I'm a religious man. I was raised to believe in grace. I believe you can be saved. So if you go ahead and you say to me, you're a new man, fine. I'll believe you at face value. However, he also says, but I was also raised to believe in retribution. So if you step out of line, I'm gonna be there. Kingpin says, is that Matt Murdock or Daredevil saying that? And Matt basically gives him the notion that, yeah, it's both. I'm gonna get you with the law, but Daredevil's gonna get you as well. So he basically says, I'll leave you alone. You leave me alone. Do the right thing. Then Kingpin tells us what we have basically been expecting this whole entire time. He's going to make being a vigilante illegal. And he tells Matt, if you come back as Daredevil, you're not above the law. I'll get you. So basically, the two of them threatened each other and said, look, do what you're saying you're gonna do, or I'm gonna be there. In which I think both don't hold up to this, obviously. He's gonna return as Daredevil and Kingpin's gonna be a crime boss, which is going to lead to something epic, because at the end, Kingpin gets elected mayor, but we start to see him already do some shady stuff in episode 2. So we see that Matt and Heather are now together. Kingpin, when he wins, is looking around for Vanessa, but she's not celebrating and she's not close to him, and then she leaves. He meets Vanessa on the roof and he tells her he knows about Adam. I'm assuming this is a man on the side that she's been seeing, because she says, "Do not kill him," implying that, yeah, they've been together. But Kingpin promises that he's not that guy anymore. On the other hand, I do think Vanessa wants him to be that guy. That's the guy she originally fell in love with. But we dive more into that as we get into episode 2. As we end episode 1, Matt drops Heather off, kisses her, good for you, buddy. And Kingpin says that he loves New York and he vows to make it a safer place. But as he says that, we see a mural being painted of him. Some graffiti of him is on the wall. This is being painted by Muse. Muse is going to be one of the main villains of this show. Now, Muse in the comics paints with the blood of his victims. And in the comics, when Mayor Fisk makes being a vigilante illegal, Muse is actually kind of inspired by Daredevil's fight against Kingpin. So he goes around painting massive murals of different vigilantes showing support. So I'm assuming it's kind of gonna go somewhat of the same way. Not much about Muse is revealed in episode 1 or 2, rarely anything, so I'm sure we're gonna dive more into him as we continue on. Now, the ending scene of episode 1 ends in the exact opposite as it begins, and as the opposite of Daredevil season 3 episode 13. In the finale of the Daredevil Netflix series, Matt is the one on top of the building overlooking the city. Kingpin is the one on the ground dealing with the chaos, being arrested by the FBI. Then in episode 1, when it opened, nobody was there. Not Daredevil, not Kingpin. It was vacant, but now at the end, Kingpin is the one up top and Matt is the one down below. And as Kingpin looks down, you can see that sometimes his face is covered by a white light, and as Daredevil looks up, sometimes his face is covered by a red light, symbolizing their colors. And that is the end of episode 1. Be sure to let me know your thoughts about episode 1, but we're going to dive right into episode 2. Now, first and foremost, for episode 2, we want to acknowledge the message that Marvel put in the beginning here, where it says, "In loving memory of Camar de los Reyes." This is the actor who plays White Tiger in episode 2. He sadly passed away December 24th of 2023. He did a great job at playing the White Tiger / Hector Ayala in this episode and in the series in general, and it's very sad to hear that he passed away. After the intro for episode 2, it starts off with Kingpin being irritated and flustered. He's about to give his first address as mayor of New York City, but what's on his mind is Vanessa. And even when he sees the teleprompter for the first time, it says, "Thank you, New York City. Vanessa and I offer you our deepest regard." And they make sure the camera focuses on the teleprompter before actually hearing Kingpin say it, so we know what's bugging him is Vanessa, his relationship with Vanessa. Kingpin addresses the city on New Year's Eve, and Matt Murdock is watching, and he says that the city feels a feeling of uneasiness, as if at any moment things could explode, and it shows Matt as he says this because that is actually how Matt is feeling right now. As if he could explode at any moment. Infuriated that Kingpin is now the mayor of New York City, that the people allowed this to happen. And to top it all off, Kingpin says in his address, we don't need a gun-toting vigilante who wears a skull on his chest, referring to the Punisher, or a man who dresses in a spider outfit, of course referring to Spider-Man, because Kingpin is a major Spider-Man villain as well. We are hoping for that team up really soon. Unfortunately, Brad Winderbaum, the head of Marvel Television, did say that Marvel doesn't have the television rights to be able to show Spider-Man in live action form, so I don't think we're getting a Spider-Man cameo unless he was lying, which I don't think he was. But ultimately, Spider-Man 4 was originally supposed to have Kingpin and Daredevil. Now it looks like Spider-Man 4 is going to take place on Battleworld, so maybe in Spider-Man 5 we could be getting the Kingpin and Daredevil and Spider-Man team up. We'll have to wait and see. But Kingpin continues and says, or a guy that wears devil horns. We don't need these people to say us. And it shows Matt listening as Kingpin says that. It gets under his skin. You can tell by the way he tries to kind of crack his neck here. Then, speaking of vigilantes, we cut to the subway, to Hector Ayala, the White Tiger, who is not currently the White Tiger. He needs his amulet to get his powers, which he explains later. So basically in this scene right here, no powers. This shows that he's a good guy though. Two people were ganging up on a defenseless guy. He tries to step in to save the guy. Unfortunately, this ends with one of the guys running at Hector, but he actually actually trips over his friend, the cop. If you freeze frame it, you can see that Hector doesn't even touch the guy. He runs and trips over his buddy. Hector dodges out of the way, but his buddy actually rolls into his legs, causing him, unfortunately, to go over the ledge, getting hit and killed by the train immediately. That's when the other person reveals that he's a cop. After the intro, they show us the BB report again, who show two guys who are kind of complaining about Daredevil and Vigilantes, kind of basically stating that they don't need them. They do this to show what the mindset of New York City, their people, is right now. And it's usually about half and half. Some people want the Vigilantes and Daredevil, and some people don't. Some people want Mayor Fisk, and some people don't. Cut to Mayor Fisk in his office. He's still primarily bugged that Vanessa isn't there. And he says he wonders if Fiorello LaGuardia had ever sat there because he was the 99th mayor of New York City from 1934 to 1946, stating that he was a hero of his father. And in the Netflix Daredevil series, we learned that his father was trying to run for the city council, most likely being inspired by Fiorello LaGuardia. Ultimately, his father lost, and that led to him getting angry, beating on his wife in front of Wilson, and Wilson ultimately ended up killing him with a hammer. So it's a little bittersweet here for Kingpin. He is now the mayor. His father tried to do something similar to it and failed, but now Kingpin is the mayor, but then it focuses on his hand. Two things to notice here. One, they're trying to get us to focus on his wedding ring because right now his relationship with Vanessa is very strained. But two, the skin on his knuckles are broken, which most likely means he was punching somebody or something. It could be he might have gotten mad and perhaps punched a wall or something after he found out about Adam, the man his wife was having an affair with, or he could have beaten the crap out of Adam despite what he said to Vanessa. In fact, he might have beaten up Adam before he went and talked to Vanessa. They don't reveal that in this episode, so that's another wait and see moment. But the main point of this is to try and show us that he doesn't exactly have his anger under control either, not unlike his father. That's why he specifically mentions his father in the scene, and then they focus on his knuckles. So as the new mayor, Kingpin has to meet with a lot of people who hate him. They hate him because he used to be a crime boss, and he probably coerced and bribed and made a lot of people do things that they didn't want to do. That's why he laughs and says, I'm used to it. But then his campaign manager, Sheila Rivera, brings up the fact that Vanessa not being around is hurting him with the more traditional voters. Again, this is to show us that Vanessa and Wilson are not exactly in a great spot, and Wilson even says, we're going through some stuff, could you maybe give us a little bit more time? And that's a pretty decent focus of this episode, Vanessa and Kingpin. But then we go to the 15th precinct. Matt is meeting with a client, but he overhears cops beating up somebody in a prison cell. And he hears them say, listen up, cop killer, you're gonna sign a confession. And this is to basically show us how corrupt the cops are. And this was really shown to us in the Netflix Daredevil series. There were some good cops, but a lot of them were corrupt, and a lot of them worked for Kingpin. But Matt goes into the cell, posing as Hector's lawyer. And when he asks him if the cops tuned him up, aka beat the crap out of him, he asks, doesn't matter. Basically saying, look, the cops are corrupt. Literally the reason I'm in this mess is because two corrupt cops were doing some pretty shady stuff with a guy, beating him down. So this kind of shows that Hector in this moment has accepted his fate. The cops are going to make him sign a confession or they're going to kill him. But here comes Matt to save the day, and Hector explains, look, they were roughing up a guy, he tripped, he fell off, I didn't kill anybody, I wasn't even trying to hurt them. And while he's saying all this, Matt is listening to his heartbeat and he can tell that he is telling the truth. This is one of the coolest abilities that Matt has, and they showcase this a lot in the Netflix Daredevil series. It makes him, as he said in Spider-Man No Way Home, a really good lawyer. So his heartbeat is calm when he's telling the story, indicating that he's telling the truth. But then when Matt asks him, is there anything you're not telling me? His heartbeat starts to speed up majorly. So then he knows that there is indeed something he's not telling him. Again, just a great skill for a lawyer to have. Before Matt leaves, Hector says, I can't afford you. Matt says, don't worry, I'd like to represent you anyways. And Hector notices he's blind. He says, wait, are you blind? And Matt just kind of smiles. I think this is going to come into play later, especially if Hector finds out that Matt is Daredevil. He's going to be like, what the heck? How can you do all of this if you're blind? Are you really blind? Because that's what a lot of people say when they find out Matt is Daredevil. Are you even really blind? Then we go to Kingpin and we can see that Daniel is with him in the car. Daniel Blake is clearly becoming quite close and important to Kingpin if he's there with him. He's already gone from somebody he didn't even know existed and didn't even know his name to somebody that is riding with him in the car. So he's getting very close with Kingpin, Daniel Blake is. Meanwhile, Sheila says, hey, for the first 100 days, you kind of just want to lay low and not put a target on your back. But Kingpin, being Kingpin, says, good, I want a target on my back because that draws attention. I want the attention. And the opportunity to get attention has presented itself in the form of a giant pothole. He goes up to the workers immediately and says, hey, fill that hole right now. They say, well, we're waiting on the permits, but he's like, I'm the mayor. I just gave you your permit, fill it up. And of course, he goes right to the pothole. Everybody is there with their cameras. And he says, look, I said I was going to do things. I'm doing things. I'm getting it done. So this shows us that he's starting to win favor of some people that might not have necessarily been for him or might have even hated him, showing us a slight turn of the tides for Kingpin. Back at Matt's firm, his partner Kirsten argues that they can't afford to take on the case right now of Hector. It's going to look like they're siding against the New York City Police Department, and it's not what their firm needs. However, Matt convinces her and Cherry to take the case. Then he tells Cherry to dig and find out a couple of different things. One, find the other guy who was being beaten by the cops so he can testify that Hector jumped in to help him and the two people never said they were cops. But two, dig in on Hector because he is hiding something even though I know he's innocent. And remember, Cherry knows that Matt is Daredevil, so that is why Cherry is so trusting that Matt does know the truth. But Kirsten was right. As they go to the courthouse, they are surrounded by news reporters asking them why they are defending a cop killer. When they get to the court, the judge automatically denies bail for Hector, claiming that he's a cop killer, allegedly. But then we find out a little bit more about Hector. Matt says he's a decorated Army veteran, he has no record, and he served as a CPA for 15 years. And he's a pillar to his community, and it kind of sounds like Frank Castle, the Punisher, a decorated veteran on trial for something he didn't do. And as Matt says all of this, some of the cops that are in the courthouse get kind of intrigued by this. And you can tell that this is kind of swaying them a little bit about the whole situation, making them think, why would a decorated Army veteran just go and kill a cop unprovoked? But thanks to Benjamin Hochberg, the Hawk, bail is denied. Now, in the comics, Ben Hochberg is the district attorney of New York City. And eventually, after Matt in the comics got banned from the bar, he was readmitted and he joined the DA office. And Hochberg considered him to be a good asset. And he would even eventually go on to find out that Matt Murdock is Daredevil. So I think Hochberg is going to be a key player in this series, at least definitely when it comes to Hector. He's supposed to be a good guy, so perhaps if they really do prove his innocence, he'll help Hector. However, Marvel Studios does throw us some twists and turns, and they aren't always page for page from the comics, which is how it should be. We then cut to B.B. Urich, who it sounds like kind of played Daniel Blake. He said, I should have known you were up to something giving me your number the other night, telling us that he was into her and thought that maybe they were going to go on a date, but it turns out she just wanted access to Kingpin. And she basically says, come on, bro, you do this for me, I help you out. I get Kingpin in with the people who are under 30, via the BB report. We also find out that Daniel said to BB that he is Kingpin's guy. And as the show goes on, I'm sure we're going to find this to be more and more true. But Daniel says to go softball on Kingpin. Basically, hey, don't get either of us in trouble. And as she goes in, Kingpin actually says, hey, I respected your coverage of my campaign. It was spot on, and you treated me with respect, which you can't really say for a lot of other people. But things take a very interesting turn when we learn that BB was named after her uncle, Ben Urich. Ben Urich was also a reporter, a very established and esteemed reporter, but Kingpin killed him. He killed him in the Netflix series when he found out that Ben visited Kingpin's mom in a nursing home. However, it was actually Karen's fault. She took Ben to a nursing home because he was trying to put his wife in one, and she didn't tell Ben that they were actually going to visit Kingpin's mother. Kingpin found out about this, and he went and he killed Ben. And Ben, even right before Kingpin killed him, said that he was alone. He didn't rat Karen out. So Kingpin gets kind of uncomfortable because he knows that he killed this woman's uncle with his bare hands, choking him to death. And it kind of looks like BB might suspect that Kingpin either killed him or had him killed. BB jumps right in and basically says, look, I asked the chief commissioner about you 3 times and he didn't tell me anything either time, so I'm thinking there's a story there. She's kind of prying a little bit too much, and she says that he's going to retire and he's going to take along with him basically the entire police force. They're going to stand behind him and protest Kingpin. And if you lose the police force, you lose the city. Kingpin realizes that she is incredibly smart, and he also kind of has the fear that she's a little bit too much like her uncle, who was incredibly good at finding the actual truth of things, so he basically dismisses her. She asks to talk about Vanessa, but he still refuses to talk to her. Daniel apologizes, basically saying, hey, I told her she can't ask about your wife, but then Kingpin says something very interesting. He says, I have a feeling she is used to being underestimated, but will use that. Again, he understands exactly who she is, the niece of Ben Urich, who found the truth. So he's not going to underestimate her, but he's also going to exploit that. Either he's going to purposefully do things to make it seem like it's the truth when it isn't, or feed her fake information like it is the truth to discredit her, to eventually prove her wrong so she gets off of his back. Or, of course, he could put her in a situation to where he kills her too. Because you know that Marvel Studios knows that fans will be up in arms if Kingpin not only kills this lady's uncle, Ben Urich, which he already did, but also kills her. That's going to be crazy. We'll see where it goes. Meanwhile, Matt's new girlfriend, Dr. Glenn, is having a book signing for a book she's written, and she runs into a man who seemingly really needs help. And he expresses this to her, and she's very kind and empathetic, so she says, I can move some things around and take you as a client. And he does seem a little sus. But what's really interesting is under the credits of this episode, when it shows us the cast, it says Hunter Duhan, which is this actor's name, and his character is listed as Bastion. And when I think of Bastion, I automatically think of the X-Men and Operation Zero Tolerance. But is this the giant X-Men villain here? Well, unless we learn that this man is in the US government and they are planning anti-mutant operations, I don't think it's probably the same Bastion. But it is very, very intriguing that they list him simply just as Bastion. And perhaps they could come up with a different story than the comics to make this X-Men villain and eventually tie into the overall X-Men story arc. But then another interesting character comes up to Heather, and it is Buck Cashman, who works for Kingpin, his current right-hand guy, although I have a feeling Daniel's going to step into that role soon. Buck Cashman, also known as Bullet in the comics, was a United States government agent who had the highest possible level of security clearance that an agent can hold. But unfortunately, much like Dex, Wilson Fisk ends up getting to him. After trying to help with a staged terrorist bombing, Daredevil showed up, and eventually down the road Buck went to jail and he confessed of murder. However, he made one call in jail and then he was let go. I'm assuming something similar is going to happen here in Daredevil Born Again. And in fact, Kingpin might use Buck to get into an even higher government position eventually. But what you should know about at least the comic version of Buck is that he is an incredible hand-to-hand fighter. He is incredibly athletic and he's been trained by various different governments in the past. So we could see this guy throw down some punches in this series. Now in the scene, it makes it seem like he is following Heather specifically because Kingpin might be wanting to keep track of Matt, and he might even be planning something. But eventually it is revealed that he was kind of scouting her out to be a counselor for Kingpin and Vanessa. However, I am sure that Kingpin does know that this woman is dating Matt Murdock, and if he doesn't know, it's going to be really crazy when he finds out. Kingpin then goes to the funeral of a cop that died, and we're assuming that this is the cop that tripped in the subway with the altercation with Hector and ended up getting killed by the subway train. Kingpin is there to see Commissioner Gallo, who BB mentioned before asked about Kingpin but never heard a word about him. And as we can tell right away, he does not like Kingpin because he knows exactly who he is and what he has done. In fact, when Kingpin says that he didn't kill this particular officer, Gallo says maybe not him, but plenty of others. Now Gallo, with his hatred towards Kingpin, basically tells him, look, I'm making sure that your run as mayor is super short. You're a thug. You've always been a thug. That hasn't changed. And he even says, see you around, Kingpin. And this was a bad idea on his part. You don't poke the bear. You don't poke the Kingpin, because as we're about to learn, it backfires tremendously. But first, we cut to Hector's home. Kirsten and Cherry are trying to go get Hector's wife Soledad to show up in court. Plus, they're there to pick up a suit for Hector, but Cherry is there to investigate. And luckily he does, because he finds the White Tiger suit and amulet. Now, White Tiger is a Puerto Rican superhero in the Marvel Universe. And you can even notice a Puerto Rican flag hanging in their kitchen. In Daredevil Born Again, they made sure to show White Tiger on the TV screen, and Cherry even mentions the White Tiger. He is out there doing good, being a good vigilante, stopping crime. time. In the comics, Hector just happens upon the tiger amulet in an alley. It was dropped there by students of someone called Master Qi, a Chinese martial arts expert. The amulets came from a jade tiger that was dismembered and the parts put inside of these amulets. The jade tiger was used to ride between Earth and an extra-dimensional realm called Ke'un-Lun. So Hector grabs the amulet and puts it on and is given the powers of the white tiger. The white tiger amulet grants Hector enhanced strength, speed, coordination, agility, durability, and healing as well. And it also gives him martial arts mastery when he puts it on. Originally, when Hector puts on the white tiger amulet, it's a separate persona and it has an unrevealed origin. But eventually, Hector learns of this and manages to merge with the persona when he puts on the amulet. And much like is happening in Daredevil Born Again in the comics, his wife does not support him when he is accused of killing a cop. So Cherry discovers that Hector is the white tiger and he calls Matt when he's on a date with Heather that is going incredibly well, and he informs him that Hector is the white tiger. So Matt visits him in prison and shows him footage of the white tiger, and we are seeing him in action here. And Matt is understandably upset. He says, "I'm trying to help you and you didn't happen to mention that you're the white tiger." But Hector even confirms, "I didn't have the amulet on, I didn't have any of the powers." So it seems like they are sticking fairly comic accurate with Hector and the white tiger here. But here's where Matt actually finds out that him and Hector are a lot alike. Matt says, "This matters for your case. If they find out you're the white tiger, you're going out looking for trouble." But Hector says, "I'm not looking for trouble. Someone has to protect the streets. People go missing, no one seems to care, and it's not like Daredevil's around anymore." And obviously, he doesn't know that he is speaking to Daredevil. But rest assured, this hits Matt, and it makes him wonder if he still should be Daredevil, if he should still be trying to save people. Now, another interesting part of this is Matt notices that Hector seems hurt, and he even says, "You look hurt, are you okay?" Hector says that he's getting beat up in jail, which might be happening, but there is a side effect of the amulet. When Hector takes it off, he experiences a very painful withdrawal period. Over time, it gets easier to deal with, so that might imply that he hasn't been the white tiger for that long. And now we get to the part where Chief Gallo, calling Kingpin a thug, comes back around to bite him in the butt. He said he's resigning, and with him, a lot of cops are going to be gone. He's basically reiterating the point that BB told Kingpin. If you lose the cops, you lose the city. So Gallo thinks that he's got Kingpin here. However, for some reason, he didn't think that Kingpin would do what Kingpin typically does as a crime boss, what he knows Kingpin has done in the past, and that is play super dirty. And this is a pivotal moment in the series so far. It shows us that although Kingpin is mayor, and he is claiming that he is not that past Kingpin anymore, that crime boss, he is still doing things that he used to do. In this case, he starts talking to Gallo about where he's from. Philly. Kingpin starts telling a story about cheesesteaks, and eventually he reveals that he had some people follow Gallo's wife and kid at a sandwich shop called D'Angelo's. Kingpin is actually eating a sandwich from D'Angelo's. He lifts up the paper and reveals the photo of his wife and son. And what Kingpin is basically saying here is, look, you know who I am, you know what I used to do, and you know I've killed cops and other people. I know where your wife and son are, and if you don't do exactly what I say, well, we're going to do something to them. So he basically tells him, look, everything that you wanted, you're not going to get. Your cops aren't going to get. And you're going to be okay with that, and you're going to stay on, or I'm going to hurt your family. And he agrees, but he does kind of give off a little warning of be careful what you wish for. However, he does agree because he knows that Kingpin will do it. And so here we see that even though Mayor Kingpin has said that he's gone on the good guy path now, he is not. He is still very much Kingpin. Meanwhile, Matt Murdock is doing his job at being a very good lawyer. He knew that if he found out that Hector was White Tiger, then the DA could as well. So he simply gets ahead of the situation. He reveals it himself to the DA and to the judge. And he makes a good case that Hector is on trial for the one single event at that night that happened in the subway, and not for anything related to White Tiger. He did not have his costume or amulet that gave him his powers, and the judge agrees. Matt then meets with Cherry, and Cherry thinks that this is a little too close to Matt because he's representing a vigilante, and of course, he used to be Daredevil. And Cherry feels that Matt might get the urge to be Daredevil once again, so he tells him, for what it's worth, I like who you are now. I like the suit you're wearing now, the suit and the tie, compared to the Daredevil suit that you used to wear. And this is mirroring how Foggy used to be with Matt. Foggy didn't want Matt to be Daredevil because it was too dangerous. And that's what Cherry is essentially doing here. Then we have a very brief but really interesting scene. We see Matt walking in the street, and he's walking across his old chapel. A lot of time in the Netflix Daredevil series was spent here at this chapel, and it's where he lived for a really long time too, both as a kid and when he was Daredevil. It's where Father Lantom taught him, both as a kid and as an adult and even as Daredevil, until unfortunately he was killed by Bullseye in season 3 trying to save Karen Page, in which he did. And it's also where he found out that Sister Maggie was his mother, who is still there currently. But this scene implies that he hasn't actually been back to church in a very long time, probably telling us that since Foggy died, he struggled with his religious beliefs. And again, I think that's going to be a pretty big part of this show, where he comes back to them and he is born again. Then we get hit with a huge twist. There was a very specific reason Buck went and met Heather at the book signing. He was searching for a psychiatrist that could do couples therapy for Kingpin and his wife Vanessa. Heather calls Matt to cancel the dinner date while she's signing an NDA, and she says it's not necessary, this comes with the job. However, considering that it's Kingpin as mayor, both the mayor and a crime boss, Vanessa, and also still Kingpin, they need to make sure Heather can't say anything. And you wonder if Kingpin knows that Matt is dating Heather, because if he knew, he probably wouldn't want to actually tell her anything, which would mean his therapy would kind of be stifled, and that means he might not recover his relationship with Vanessa, which we know is the most important thing to him. So perhaps he doesn't know that she's dating Matt, but at the same time, it definitely is a Kingpin move to be very close to somebody that Daredevil cares about. It could go either way at this point. But in this scene, Vanessa says that they've been through a lot over the past couple of years, basically telling us that the events that happened in the finale of Daredevil on Netflix, that was 2 years ago. And since we know that Vanessa sat by Kingpin's side for months while he recovered, I'm guessing Kingpin was gone for probably about a year and a half, definitely over a year. So Kingpin left Vanessa for over a year, and he explains that he couldn't talk to her at all. That's what he needed. So we can definitely understand where Vanessa's coming from, as she feels betrayed by Kingpin, by her husband, and she's confused now that he's back. And right now their relationship, their marriage, is in such bad shape that she says they're at therapy because she feels they don't have a choice. And Kingpin says he's there because he doesn't want to lose his wife. Because despite Kingpin leaving her for over a year, he really does love her, and he really has always been about Vanessa. But to end episode 2 with a bang, we see Matt Murdock following the cop who is claiming Hector killed the other cop. He listens in on the phone call that he gets, and he finds out that that cop and somebody else are going to kill the other guy that was there on the subway, because that's the witness who can testify that Hector is innocent. Matt ends up finding him first because he overhears the address on the phone call. He tells him who he is, and Nikki lets him in. Matt tells Nikki he needs to testify, but Nikki says, I can't. They're the cops. If I go to testify, they're going to kill me. But Matt says, too late. They're already here. Go to the park. I have a guy waiting for you. He'll find you. He'll get you somewhere safe. The crooked cops come and they go, you're the lawyer. And Matt explains, yeah, basically the witness that's going to prove Hector is innocent, he's gone. So one of the cops grabs him, throws him up against the wall, and we see that on his left wrist, he has a Punisher skull tattoo. And from what we know, thanks to some set photos that were released, people are going to be wearing the Punisher logo to essentially frame Frank Castle. It seems like there is some criminal organization running around and they are using his skull logo. And we do know that Frank Castle is returning. The Punisher is returning. Marvel has already showed him in trailers, and he's most likely returning to take on this crime organization and clear his own name again. But the cops ask, where did he go? And Matt makes a joke saying, hey man, I'm blind. I don't know where he went. And then the two start wailing on him. And Matt is really trying in this circumstance to hold back the devil. He could beat these guys down super easily, but he's trying to not let the devil out. But unfortunately, they go to kill him, and he's obviously not going to let them do that. So the devil comes out, and he absolutely beats the hell out of them. He breaks one of their arms clear in half, then he bashes his face onto a beer bottle, slams the other's head into the refrigerator repeatedly, blood splattering all over it, till he throws his body head first right into the floor. Then once he's done, he yells because he's pissed that he had to let the devil out. He's pissed that he's in this situation where Daredevil is probably going to have to come back. He's been trying to leave that behind him. But what a way to end episode 2. And the first 2 episodes were absolutely fantastic. I love them both. Please go ahead, let me know what you thought about them in the comments down below. Please don't forget to like the video and subscribe, because we're going to be breaking down every single episode of Daredevil Born Again. Plus we talk about Marvel news every single day on the channel. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. Woof woof.